market gardener based in North Pembrokeshire in West Wales, and I'll be facilitating the webinar tonight. Behind the scenes, we have Lauren from the Landworkers Alliance, who is doing support and tech. And if you have any issues or questions or anything's coming up, you can send her a private message in the chat box, and her name in the chat box will be Tech Lauren, LWA. So please feel free to send her a private message if you've got any issues, or you can send me a message as well. And we're very delighted to have Natalie and Heather joining from Agricola Farm Co-operative in Quebec in Canada with us tonight, who will be presenting. So just say a little bit about the webinar series. So this is the 10th webinar that we've run this year. We've run a webinar every month so far. In 2021, we've run topics on seed saving, agroforestry, no-dig, forward season growing, and many, many more. And the whole project is funded by Farming the Future, and it's a collaboration between the Landworkers Alliance, the Organic Growers Alliance, the Gaia Foundation Seed Sovereignty Programme, and the CSA Network. And we work together to deliver this project, and we will be running the series again, monthly webinars in 2022. Just to go through a few logistics, this webinar is being recorded tonight, and it will be made publicly available on the Landworkers Alliance website shortly after we process the recording. And the webinar will be up to an hour and a half tonight, so 6 to 7:30. And Natalie and Heather will be presenting for about 45-50 minutes, and then we're going to leave a good half an hour for questions and discussion with everybody attending. Please feel free to use the chat box if you have any questions, but just make sure that you're sending your messages to all panelists and attendees, so we can all see your questions. But there's also a Q&A box set up where you can ask questions, and in the Q&A box there's this upvoting function. So if you see a question asked that you really also want to know the answer to, you can kind of vote on it. So when we have the half hour at the end to do the kind of questions and discussion, we can give a bit of preference to questions that a lot of people said that they would like to focus on. So I'll introduce Natalie and Heather now from Agricola Cooperative Farm. So Agricola Cooperative Farm was started in 2019, and they grow asparagus, mixed vegetables, and flowers, and it's a workers cooperative managed collectively by 4 friends and young farmers: Heather, Hannah, Natalie and Caleb. And they're growing on 3.5 acres, and they run a CSA, a farmers market, and they're part of a producers co-op. And the session tonight is focusing, I guess, a lot on, well, the title's like, how to cultivate a healthy work culture on your farm. So we're going to be exploring lots of different topics with Natalie and Heather, but focusing on how to kind of create and practice empowering participatory dynamics for everyone who works on a farm. Farm, woodland, land-based business. I do say farm, but we are talking about any land-based business because the principles apply to all different kinds of models. And we'll just be, I guess, through exploring the way Agricola Cooperative Farm works, we'll be really looking at, I guess, just different ideas for how we can kind of, on our land-based businesses, work more cooperatively and look at how we do revolving responsibilities, peer-to-peer appraisals, managing conflict when it arises, how to kind of cultivate a sense of fulfillment and engagement in the work we do, exploring healthy farm life balance. There's a lot of topics there to kind of that we can go through. So I'll hand it over now to Natalie and Heather, who we're very delighted to have here with us, and they will present, and then we'll have a group discussion afterwards.
Hi everyone, thanks so much for having us, and we're super honored that the Landworkers Alliance reached out to talk about this. It's a subject we're super passionate about, but we also feel a little, it's exciting to be talking to people also, outside of Canada. So we're hoping to make some good connections as well. I'm really excited to learning from you, because it's interesting to hear in the chat how many cool cooperative projects there are already. So we're really looking forward to that. I'm just going to share our little presentation now and just confirm that that is working. So is everyone able to see our presentation here?
Yeah, it looks good.
Perfect. Wonderful. Yeah, so we're going to talk today about, I have a little just sort of set of topics about cultivating a healthy work culture on our farm, which has been a really high priority for us throughout the course of our business. And we are super honored to speak on this, but also really want to be clear that we're only in the third year of our business. So we're not at all pretending that we have all the answers, or even that, we have these really clear instructions we can give you. What we're going to try and do is share some of the processes that we've been through in order to set up our structures, and then also to improve on them, because we have been doing a lot of really focused work, especially in the past year, to make our structures internally work better, so that we have jobs that we love, so that we have employees who are really satisfied with the work they're doing, and so that the farm that we're building is sustainable for us in the long term. So that's our goal, but we're not pretending that we're there yet. It's always a work in progress. So we're just hoping that as we share some of the things that we've been through, that can sort of like spark things for different situations that might be applicable to you. And then we can dive in a little more in the question period and sort of go from there. So just a really brief history about our farm. So Agricola Cooperative Farm was started by the four of us. So there's Heather, Hannah, Caleb, and myself, Natalie, in this photo. We all met in university about 15 years ago, and Heather and I actually went to like elementary school together. So these are relationships that we've had for a long time. But when we met in university, we weren't studying agriculture in any way. We were studying sort of philosophy, literature. And so the dream, the sort of spark for the farm was about agriculture, and it was about connection with the land, but it was also very much about having a project in common and having a life in common. So that was sort of our airy kind of dream that we had for a long time, that was not very grounded in business, and it wasn't really grounded in a sense of what the work of farming actually was. And so in order to get that experience and see what farming really looked like, all four of us spent 5 or 6 years working on other people's farms, doing some woofing, some unpaid internships, paid work on farms across Canada, as well as some experiences abroad. So doing that, we saw both a lot in terms of the more technical farming things, a lot of models that we were drawing from. We got to see what we wanted to do and what we didn't. But we also saw that in terms of the sort of lives that people were building on their farms and the models that people had for working together. So we worked on farms where we had really wonderful managers. And I would say we also worked on farms where there were great farmers who weren't necessarily great managers and who weren't necessarily living the kind of lives that we felt we wanted in our farm business. One thing I noticed is that we saw especially a lot of couples or families who were feeling really overwhelmed, trying to do every single part of their business by themselves. And I think that really solidified each of our kind of decisions to want to pursue a cooperative model as the model for our business, because I think it was clear to us that we didn't want all that responsibility, that it's so much to take on. And we felt like doing it together was the best way to have a life that we wanted. So after lots of planning and research and working on other people's farms for quite a while, we started our farm business on rented land in 2019, had a first season. And then at the end of that season, we were able to buy our own property in fall of 2019, which you see here. So it's a 160-acre property, which had previously been run as an asparagus farm. So the sort of big green square that you see here is asparagus, which is about 4 acres worth of asparagus. And then you see also the sort of mixed veg that we have, which we're always a little unsure, but it's also around 4.5 acres, and we do about 1/4 acre of cut flowers as well. So we've been running the business here on our farm for the past 2 seasons, and we all live on the property as well. So the 4 of us who are in the co-op, but also Heather's partner, Ryan, who doesn't work in the business, but is a part of our life on the farm, as well as her baby. So we're all living in the house together, which is a sort of important part of all of our dynamics, because our, learning to work we're working together, but we're also living together. So the communication, all of that is super important and also very dense. There's a lot of sort of like layers to all of that. So just briefly on the cooperative structure, the farm is structured as a workers cooperative, which means that the 4 of us collectively manage the business, and we also work in the business. There's a lot of different cooperative and collective models, and we also weren't totally sure to what extent they're sort of transferable between Canada and the UK. But just to say that if it's something you're looking into, there's a lot of different models. It doesn't all have to be everyone working full-time, having the same responsibilities. So just to encourage you to really look at different models if that's something that you're interested in. But one of the principles within the sort of bigger cooperative movement that's really important to us is the idea that the people who are most affected by decisions are involved in making those decisions. And so that applies to sort of what we try and do, and applies as well to like our relationship with our employees. In terms of how it works, Heather's going to go more into the roles and responsibilities, but just very briefly, the 4 of us share management responsibilities. And when we were setting up the farm, it was really important to us that we were sharing both management responsibilities in the field and administrative duties, because one of the things that we had seen often, especially in a couple, is that things sort of get divided, where one person ends up doing a lot of field work, one person ends up doing a lot of administrative work. And we were all pretty clear for ourselves that like part of why we wanted to farm was because we loved being in the fields. And so sharing those administrative duties was part of what would allow each of us to have a more balanced job. And so that means that in some domains, each of us is more of a manager. And then in a lot of domains, we're also just sort of a worker. We're just executing more of the decisions that someone else has made. And Heather's going to talk a bit more about that. But I think that day to day, what it means is that in general, we have a nice mix of doing work that's more challenging and also more stimulating in terms of management, making choices, being the boss, but that also we get to just sometimes sit down and, bunch a lot of carrots and not be the boss, which for me, at least, is something that I really enjoy about the cooperative model, is not always having to be in charge, making decisions. So just to talk really briefly about the scale of our business now. So we're in our 3rd year, we're growing fairly bio-intensively. We're mostly hand scale, but we do have a tractor that we use for some of the production. And yeah, so we have the asparagus, the mixed vegetables, and the flowers. And we sell through a CSA program, which has about 220 members this year. We do a farmer's market, which you see a photo of here. We have a kiosk on the farm, which is especially busy during our asparagus season, which is a 6-week period, which is super busy. And then we're also part of a producers cooperative with 7 other farms. We're not necessarily going to talk a ton about the producers cooperative in the presentation, but we'd be super happy to talk about it later in the questions, because it's something that we've really loved for our business. And this year, Heather has been on maternity leave. She had baby in February. And so we've been 3 members of the co-op working full-time on the farm. And then we had 4 full-time employees during the full season. And during that asparagus season, we also have quite a few seasonal employees. So we have during that 6-week period, there are around 15 people who are working for the business. So that's really a peak, but has evolved into like really having to think about how we're managing that big group of people. One other thing that I wanted to touch on scale is just the fact that in the past 2 years, we've been able to pay all the 4 of us a full-time salary from the farm. It's something that we feel is like adequate right now, and we're working to raise further to something that feels really good and sustainable over the next couple of years. And we're not talking too much about the financial part of things, but I did want to touch on it just to say that paying ourselves enough that we can live off of it and paying our employees a wage that feels adequate is a really important part of what we see as like a sustainable business and a good quality of life. So that's something that we aren't talking about too much now, but is actually a really important part for us of making the farm a good place to work for ourselves and for our employees.
So I'll start talking about our roles and responsibilities on the farm a bit more in detail. When we started the farm, we knew that it was going to be really important for us to define our roles and responsibilities ahead of time. And so we worked together to make a roles and responsibilities chart before the first season that we grew. So you can see the first page of the chart on screen. So we marked down for each task who is accountable, who's responsible, consulted, participating, and informed. So the idea is that if we have this ahead of time done, then when we're in the field and a question comes up, it's very clear who is in charge for that domain, that task. So the idea is that these roles are set longer term, but with room to move around. So this is something that we revisit at least once a year in the winter and go over all the tasks and see if it's equally divided and if everybody's happy with their responsibilities. We still consult with each other for big decisions, but the day-to-day responsibilities and winter planning roles, it's clear who's responsible, and that person has autonomy to make decisions. So like Natalie was saying, it's a huge part of the way we've structured our farm and the decision to be a cooperative is to not have to make every decision. And so you don't have to worry about someone else's responsibility. So for example, I'm not in charge of irrigation. So I only think about irrigation when Hannah, whose responsibility that is, asks me to execute something, because while she's responsible, we're all participating in that as part of the field work on the farm. It also has really helped our employees to know who to go to if they have a question. We don't share with them exactly the roles and responsibilities chart, but we do outline to them at the beginning of the season who's in charge of which task. And it does happen that a task comes up, especially in the beginning of our farm. Something would come up that we weren't sure where it went, or 2 people felt that they were in charge of it. So that wasn't a fault, that the roles and responsibilities chart wasn't clear enough. So at that moment, we go back in, we'd break out, okay, so this is actually 2 different tasks, and this person's in charge of that, and this person's in charge of this one, or we just clarify it as needed. So the roles and responsibilities chart lets us adapt our work to different people's abilities and find tasks that we can each do without having to take on every single management task on the farm individually. It gives us the flexibility to focus more intensely on what we're doing and to really benefit from working in a team and not have to consult everybody on everything. We can also change our tasks to fit people's different abilities, accommodate for illness or injury. And we have the ability to restructure and revisit our roles because this isn't set in stone. It's something that we work on and make together. So we want to make sure that everything's balanced and covered. And we even factor employees' responsibilities into it. So you can see we have a 5th column there, which is employees. And that one is particularly changing year to year, depending on if we have returning employees and what their interests are. So some of the challenges that we've found so far, and Natalie will get more into this when we talk about conflict resolution, but we do try to mix our roles between where we feel comfortable and where we're learning and pushing ourselves. And so that can create some challenges because somebody might have more knowledge or ideas in an area, but we still have to learn to take ownership of that. And they also have to learn to allow us to take ownership of that. So that's something that we've really been working on, especially this last year. We've also taken a conscious effort to challenge traditional gender divisions. So for example, the admin work being divided through all of us, as well as the field work, and just consciously thinking about that to make sure that we're not setting up those gender divisions in a way that feels uncomfortable to us. So this chart was really helpful when I was preparing for mat leave. I had a baby in February of this year. He is 8 months now. So we revisited the chart, as you can see in the picture. I wrote out what all my responsibilities were and had everybody rank them with roles of what they wanted to do, could do, and couldn't do. And so we were able to divide my responsibilities up equally between the three of them and talked about ways that we can share more responsibilities with employees. So Natalie took on a lot of my field work responsibilities during the busy season, and we assigned one of our employees to be the greenhouse manager. And that was a way of sort of moving things around to allow for that to happen more naturally. I decided to keep bookkeeping as my only responsibility. And at the time that we were planning, I sort of thought, well, I'd like to be in the field a lot, but let's plan that I've passed off all my responsibilities in case I can't be. And turned out that working in the field with a baby didn't really work for me and my baby. I had really thought that I'd be out in the field with my baby on my back, as we so often see on Instagram or other people sharing that. You can see a photo of one of the rare moments in which we are actually in the field, but I'm really thankful that we planned for that scenario where I wouldn't be out there in the field every day, because especially at the beginning, that just wasn't possible for us. So being a member of a cooperative has given me the flexibility to take this full maternity leave. I'll just note that here in Canada, I do have 12 months paid government leave. So that is another thing that has allowed that for me and for the business. So we were able to hire another employee because the farm is not paying me a salary this year. And then one other thing about the maternity leave, it has been a challenge, especially at the beginning, to work through being on leave and being at the farm. And that's something that was really hard to prepare for because I didn't really know. It's very hard to set up boundaries and to feel both involved to the degree that I wanted to be, as well as take the space that I needed when the farm is happening around you every day. So that really was just a learning process of being comfortable to say, no, I can't go out into the field today. But it definitely took a little bit of time to feel comfortable with that. I do still participate in the cooperative meetings, which happen every 2 weeks. And I'm very thankful that I have my parents are actually here right now looking after my baby. So that is what has allowed me to be involved in the level that I am in the farm. So a lot of our roles and responsibilities, sort of ideas behind that is the recognition that there's so much to do on the farm. There's lots of different ways for people to contribute with the strengths that they bring. And so we are really trying to resist burnout by letting go of our ego that tells us that we're the only person who can do a job, by splitting up the jobs between us. So we also recognize that even though we may have responsibilities that are ours, we want other people to be able to take that on as needed. So it was a big letting go of those roles for me going on maternity leave. And if somebody needed to take time off for any other reason, if only one person can do something, there's very little resilience and a lot of pressure. You need to work when you're sick or burnt out. And that really wasn't a model that we were interested in. So practically, this means that we have to work on expanding our training so that each of us and our employees has the skills to step into different tasks. And we need to create, and this is something that we're still very much working on, clear guidelines and operating guides for all the different tasks and parts of the farm operation.
Wonderful. So I'm going to sort of build a bit more on that and talk about the sort of work-life balance, resisting burnout, trying to build lives that actually feel good to us on the farm. Definitely when we started the farm, I would say the four of us had like a solid 2 years where we just worked basically nonstop on the farm business. And to some extent, I think that phase feels inevitable, or it was unavoidable at the time. And I think that we were all sort of ready to commit to that. We really wanted to grow a successful business quickly. And so we sort of consented to make those sacrifices at the time, but we also were really aware that it wasn't a sustainable way to live. We were giving up a lot in order to do that. And so in the winter of last year, we really made it a priority to figure out how to have a better work-life balance while also having a successful business, and to set clear boundaries around our work, which was especially important for us as we all live together. But it's something that I imagine that if you're a couple, if you're a family who's farming, is also really important to have that boundary between the home and the business. So we were able to work with a business coach who's been really helpful for us in setting up a lot of these frameworks that we've used to try and set up our structures better so that we can have that work-life balance, have time for ourselves. So one of the things we did with her was, this is something we did done a little bit before, but we used the holistic farm planning model to sort of collectively set a vision for ourselves of what our goals were, as well as what our principles and values were in order to get there. Here's just a little example of those principles that we worked on all together that sort of helped us to guide where we were going. And you'll see that, you know, they're about the business, but they're also very much about sort of the culture that we're working to create and the jobs that we're wanting within that. So building on those principles, our coach asked us to write sort of a set of goals. So each of us, you can see in this slide, had a set of sort of like goals that were both around the business and more personal. And then what we did after that was group those all together and try to create categories. And we found between the four of us, there was a lot of overlap. And so that's what allowed us to make these sort of different categories that we were grouping together. And we all sort of consented that these would be our collective farm goals. So some of them are a little more loose, but some of them are pretty specific. So having a week's vacation during the summer season, which is like the big important season, was something that we all agreed would be really beneficial. And it was also something that felt manageable at that point. I don't think that like we could do that this year. I don't think it would have been realistic in our first 2 years, but this was something that felt sort of like a stretch, but we could do it. But having those goals that were really concrete and measurable was really helpful for us, because it's easy to say, I want work-life balance, and it's much easier to know whether or not you're achieving that when you can say, I did have a week off during the summer, you know whether it happened or not. So we were able to be fairly successful in implementing those goals. All of us did have a week's vacation, including our employees, during the summer. And we also had a much clearer schedule of when we were working or not during the year. So for stuff like markets and our farm chores, which also allowed us to have more clarity on the weekends when we weren't working. So that liberated a lot of time and also mental energy for each of us. Oh, so here you can see just the sort of set of the action plan that our coach helped us make and format our goals into. And it's just interesting to see here that she's very detail oriented. So I find it nice that there's kind of these indicators, how you know whether you've succeeded in your goal or not. You have the person who's doing sort of the follow-up on it. There's a clear deadline, and there's sort of the action that will be the next step. So setting all of our goals into that framework was really helpful for us to actually be able to achieve them. So another of our goals this year was to ensure that our work days and our work weeks had really clear start and end times, and that we weren't working hours that were going to burn us out or burn our employees out. So a big part of being able to do that is just having enough labor to do all the tasks we need to do in a week. So Caleb, who's one of our co-op members, made this spreadsheet that you see here. Well, this is sort of a graph based on it. It's tied to our crop plan. So basically what it's representing is the different number of labor hours attached to each task, which we estimated and will be refining this winter. And then it's sort of mapping, you can see when the peaks for transplanting or harvesting are going to be. So that also helped us to see when the busy weeks were. And it also helped us to pinpoint the points where we didn't have enough labor for what we wanted to do. So one of the things that this set of charts sort of helped us do was make the decision to hire a part-time harvester 2 days a week, because it was clear that we weren't going to have quite enough labor to get those harvests done on those busy days. It also helped to clarify, you can sort of see back here, what the busiest weeks are, which intuitively we sort of know, but is really helpful to see visually. And that allowed us to sort of shift our schedule to say, like, no one's going to take vacation in June, because a week vacation during June would really set us back, but in August, that's a feasible thing. And then another tool that he created, which was really helpful for us, was this clear weekly schedule. It doesn't look quite as clear in this format, but what it does is shows for each day of the week, what task is happening when. And this is obviously always going to shift, but knowing that we had sort of a time for each of the tasks we have to do in the week, and how many people we're expecting that task to take, was really helpful in terms of reducing conflict, because we were finding that prioritizing what happened when was a really big issue. And it also provides a lot of clarity for us. It helps us all to understand what's supposed to be happening when, and it's clear when it's not happening, when we need to allot more time. Another really useful thing about this schedule is that we have admin time and what we call flex work built into it. So we are recognizing that the 4 of us as co-op members, as farm owners, are going to work more than the 40 hours a week that our employees work. But we don't necessarily want that to mean that we're just expected to work endlessly. So we have, for some of the specific admin tasks, you don't see it here, but we have some specific like days and times for those. And then we also have these flex work times. And so you see at the beginning and end of the day, sort of outside of the work day, there's this 2 hours kind of built in. And what that's helpful for us is that, for me, I really prefer working in the morning because I'm doing a lot of the admin work, replying to emails. Whereas Caleb, who made this chart, really prefers working in the evening. And so part of what that helps resolve is that we don't feel that just because we see someone working in the field, it means that we also have to be working, which is super important as we all live on the farm. So knowing that we have these moments that we know that each of us is going to be working, but having the flexibility to do it on a schedule that works for us is really helpful. And then the last thing I just wanted to touch on is within this weekly calendar. I know on some farms that I've worked on, there's a lot of stress in the environment, partly because it feels like you're always rushing to the next thing. You never have quite enough time to do what you have to do. So when we were building our schedule, one of the things we really wanted to prioritize was making sure we have as few sort of like crisis points as possible. So examples of this are just around like harvest. So we're always pretty much harvesting the day before something is actually going out, because we find that when you have to harvest something and it's going out at noon, it's just a really stressful situation, and there's a lot less sort of buffer room for things to go wrong, something to break, and having to be really fast and really strong. And so creating those buffer times, creating that space allows us, to have something go wrong and it not be a crisis. And it's also been really useful as we have a bigger team and we're training more people, because the 4 of us are fairly experienced farm workers. But as we have more employees, we know that we have to give that allowance for the fact that they're learning to do this for the first time. So that's been an important part of building a schedule that is less stressful in the day-to-day.
So in terms of employees, this season we had 4 full-time seasonal vegetable employees. So we say full-time seasonal employees. I think it might be a bit different depending on how mild your climate is, but for us, our growing season is basically April to November, sort of. So our employees this year, those ones were working about 6 months for us. And so I'm going to talk about our experiences with them. We also have our asparagus employees who are with us for 6 weeks. We had harvesters. We actually hired an asparagus manager this year, because I forgot to mention that in the maternity leave. That was the one task of mine that we went through, and nobody was able to take on managing the asparagus harvest. That is a very busy time on our farm, and everybody's busy with their own tasks. And so we actually hired somebody to come in and manage for us. And we hired employees to work in the kiosk selling the asparagus, because last year we were doing that on a rotational basis, and we found that was really hard to be out of the field at a moment when there's so much going on. And we felt confident that that was somewhere where somebody else could represent the farm for us, that we didn't personally need to be there greeting our clients. So we do still want to have great relationships with our asparagus employees, and we work on that area, but at this point in our business, a little bit less. We've been really focusing on our full-time employees. So I'm going to talk about our experience with them. So for this year and for the near future, we've decided not to have any employees live on farm. We don't have the infrastructure, and we also don't really feel prepared to take on the dynamics and points of tension that can come along with that. So during our hiring process in the winter, we got together as a farm and talked about what we were looking for in our employees. We weren't just interested in their experience, work experience, but we also wanted to think about what kind of team we wanted. We wanted to ask directed questions to figure out if our candidates had the right mix of hardworking and compatible personalities to get along with us. And we actually worked with our coach to figure out what those questions should be. So she helped us figure out just really directed questions to get at the information that we wanted to know. It was really important for us to think about having a cohesive team. So not looking at each employee individually, but looking at the group as a whole. So in the hiring, we also really tried to present ourselves and the job honestly and genuinely, because we think it's really important to have people who want to be there, who know what they're signing up for. And it worked out really well for us this year. We had 1 returning employee, and we hired 3 new employees, 2 of which or next year we'll have 3 returning employees. So we're feeling pretty great about our limited, this is our first year with so many employees. We only had 1 last year. So we're very happy with the start of our time as employers. So with our employees, we chose to start them early enough to have time for field orientation and building up physical strength. I know that for all of us in the spring, we have to be building up our physical strength as well. And so we wanted to make sure that we weren't throwing people in without time for that. We also planned a sit-down orientation at the beginning of the year. We shared our structure of our farm, the crop planning, our finances, and we also gave our employees space to share about themselves and their learning styles. So even though it was super busy time, it's hard to say, okay, we can take this hour or two at the end of the day to sit down and do this all together. We did do it, and I think that it's something that we will continue doing going forward because it made a huge difference. One of the reasons we share our financial information with our employees is we want them to understand the whole picture of our business, including its successes and challenges. Many farm employees, like we were once, want to be farmers themselves one day. And we think that helping them to understand the business side is really important too. So I'll just talk a few more points about our setup for our employees. So we try to empower them to choose tasks they prefer where possible and create space for reviews and feedback throughout the season to catch problems early. That's definitely somewhere we're still working on. It's hard to make sure that you're able to do enough reviews with them or check-ins throughout the busy season. And we include employees in our season review in the end of the season. They have valuable insight, and we want to hear what they thought went well and went badly, because often they're the ones doing a task more often than we are. Another really important thing we find is celebrating successes together. So having staff appreciation parties, letting them know when something goes well. It helps them to feel a sense of pride in the farm as well. We try to allow them to take on seasonal responsibilities. So like I said, we had a greenhouse manager this year. There's one employee who really contributed in the wash station. We had 2 employees who participated in bouquet making regularly. And we're going to meet with them before the end of the year to talk about, do they want to keep those tasks? Do they want to change those tasks for next year, to help them guide us in what they're interested in doing. Our preference is to have returning employees. We'll increase their pay, but they don't need training. They can take on management roles. They can train new employees. They're really invaluable, especially in the spring when they come in and they know what to do at that busy time. A new thing we did this year that went really well was making and signing contracts with our full season employees. We made clear boundaries, hours, expectations, and that was a space where we were able to present that to them and make sure that they understood what the year would look like going into it. We also try really hard to respect their hours. So their time off, their lunch hour, about the end of the day. If it's 4 o'clock and they're supposed to be done at 4, we remind them that they're done. There's the rare day when we might do an extra half hour of work, and then the next day they could leave a half hour early. And if we're making any changes to the schedule, we consult with them. So for example, with the days getting shorter, we're starting later. And so that was a decision made in consultation with them because it really impacts their lives as well. We also allow our employees to take breaks as needed. So we have to consciously work on modeling this resistance and behavior for our employees. So taking breaks when needed, not working, or changing tasks when you're feeling sick or in pain. We think that it's important that we mitigate burnout in both ourselves and our employees. We want to increase employee satisfaction, and we want them to work hard when they're here. So for us, it's better if they take a sick day and come back at 100% than to be here all week at 50%. And we decided this year to offer our full season employees 3 paid sick days. And at the end of the season, they have all used them. And it was definitely something that we are glad we did. And it made it easier for them to take the time to get better when they needed to. And we also offered them each a week's vacation. As Natalie said, it was not, we gave sort of a window in which they could take it. And we also made a rule that no more than 2 people on the farm could be on vacation at the same time, because there are there's 2 couples within our team. So we recognize that they'd want to take vacation together, but we didn't want to also have another person off at that same time. So one of our employees from the summer said the thing that she most appreciated here was that she felt she could bring her whole self to work, that it was a safe space to be genuine and not to always be forced to be cheerful. So we think that for us, it's really important to actually get to know our employees and respect who they are, their motivations for being here, and also to bring ourselves and show them who we are, be honest about what's hard for us. And so that we allow space for people to work independently, be in a bad mood, have space when needed, because we would want that for ourselves. And so that's something that I think is hard to always do when you have big team tasks and things to do, but has been really important for us to try to work on that.
So the last sort of big topic that we're going to talk about is this sort of juicy one around, I think, conflict resolution, decision making, which is one of the things that I would say that sort of people ask us about the most, and we know from being part of groups is one of the big issues for people. Whenever you're working with a big group of people, there's a certain amount of conflict and there's challenges on working together. So one of the things when we were working with our coach last winter that we really wanted to talk about was conflict between the 4 of us as co-op members. We recognize that a certain amount of conflict is inevitable, and in a lot of cases, it can be really productive and generative. The idea is not to have no conflict, because inherently that's how good decisions get made. That's how new ideas come about. But we were finding in our dynamics that there were these patterns of conflict and these sites where it kept coming up that weren't helping anyone, that weren't feeling productive or generative, and were just making us feel bad. So part of the work we did then was identifying what those sites of conflict were and trying to figure out whether there were sort of structural solutions to the issues. So one of the big issues that we touched on already was this roles and responsibilities chart. Although our roles were pretty clear at that point, we found that one big site of conflict was when it wasn't clear who was responsible for something, or when there was 2 people responsible for the same task. So clarifying that chart was really helpful, and this year has helped us avoid a lot of those conflicts that we had last year. It also allowed us to be more accepting of someone else's decisions because it was on the chart. It was all very clear. One of the other big sites of conflict that we identified was our meetings. So as a cooperative, as 4 people, we have a lot of meetings, but we were finding last year that they were often sites of tension, and then they were also feeling inefficient. Even though we were talking a lot, it didn't feel like decisions were getting made in a clear or easy way. So one thing we did was really, with our coach, was work to clarify the different kinds of meetings we had to have, how often we wanted to have them, and what the goals of each of the meetings were. So for us, what that looks like is we have a bi-weekly, so every 2 weeks, co-op meeting between the 4 co-op members, which is 2 hours. And that's where we discuss the bigger picture sort of questions for the farm, any big purchases or investments, and our like action plan, but beyond just the day-to-day harvesting, weeding sort of stuff, what we need to do to be pushing our projects forward. And I'll just show you our agenda here because there's a few elements that I want to sort of draw out. We start the meeting now with a moment of quiet silence or grounding that allows us a break from like the hectic busyness of the day, which has been really helpful because we were finding often we're just going into meetings with everything that was happening during the day, and we weren't necessarily feeling connected to ourselves or each other. So having that 2 minutes has actually been really helpful in just like bringing everyone's sort of temperature down and also allowing us to connect a little bit more. The next thing we do is an emotional check-in. So that is how just sort of a go around, each of us just sharing how we're doing in our life and also in relation to the farm. That having that sort of container for that and knowing that it's coming, I think is really helpful for not letting it always spill out into other things. And it's also an opportunity for us to share when there is something that's harder going on that is maybe impacting our work and our life and everything. The next thing we do is updates in new business. So that's more just talking about topics that we haven't had a chance to discuss elsewhere or something that we want to put on an agenda for a future meeting. One sort of note around that is a really important strategy that we learned from some of our co-op mentors was the idea of not making a decision on something in the same meeting or space where it's brought up. And so that's part of why we have this like new business, because the idea is that we can have a discussion on something, raise all the information, get the questions out, but when there's not the pressure to make that decision, we're less likely to just fall into sort of our instinctive reactions to something. When we have a bit of time to think about it, we can really process things, think through what we need to do, and ask the appropriate questions. So that's been really helpful. So you can see here just, you know, the various conversations that we're having, and then we're scheduling the future meetings where we're maybe going to bring up those other questions. We have this little end of meeting check-in, which is partly just to reflect on how do we all feel? Like, do we feel like this went well? Are we feeling like there's sort of outstanding issues that we're not feeling good about? Any of that. So the other two sort of sets of meetings that we have are a little more probably familiar to people or traditional. The co-op members or managers have a weekly 1-hour meeting where we're deciding more on the tasks for the week. So we're using this schedule that I showed you earlier. So that's really the framework. So we know to a certain extent every Monday we harvest, you know, and then we do our hot crop harvest, whatever it is. But then that's where the managers can bring sort of what's really important or different in their realm. And also where we can bring different scheduling things, make sure that certain things are happening, adjust for weather. And that's also where we're making like more small scale decisions that have to be discussed between the managers. So we'll put that into a calendar and then show it, share it with our staff on the whiteboard. So everything will be written on the whiteboard. We have a little 20-minute meeting with staff to go over that so they have a really clear sense of what's happening during the week. And then just daily, we have a little quick 5-minute beginning of the day check-in just to do a little dispatch. Everyone knows what's going on. And we find it helpful that the whiteboard is there that everyone can look at throughout the week in case there's questions. They know what the priorities are too. So conflict resolution is the other sort of topic that we wanted to talk about, because as much as this work that we've done on these sort of structural sites of conflict really helped, there's still going to be a certain amount of conflict when you work with people and you live with people and you're together all the time. So working with our coach, one of the other processes that we did for that was clarifying what kind of decision-making processes we needed for different decisions. We had started the farm with the idea that the consensus model was what worked for us. But through working with her and through some of these conflicts, we came to understand that we don't actually need to have consensus on all of our decisions, that it's really important for us to have consensus on the big picture, on like where we're going, what we all want to do. But there's like hundreds of decisions that happen every week on a farm, and we don't all need to agree on all of them because there's so many different ways to approach each problem. So doing that roles and responsibilities chart, accepting that someone's going to do something in a different way than I am, was a big step in reducing those sort of sites of conflict. And just a note that for us, consensus works well, partly because we're 4 people. Voting in a lot of bigger co-ops is a really good way to do it, but 4 people is a bad number for voting. And it also just worked for our kind of decision-making and communication style. But there's lots of different ways to make decisions, and you can explore that within your group, what works best for you. And then the other tool that we've really been using to deal with conflict is nonviolent communication, which is a training and sort of a set of principles, a framework as an approach to conflict. So I'm not going to get too much into it, but if it's not something that you've heard about, I would definitely recommend, there's a lot of resources online, so you can dive into it. And we found that doing a training with people, we actually did a training session with a group of other farmers, was really productive to understand the framework and to sort of get it as a common language that we could all use together when approaching this framework. So just the 2 things I wanted to pull out about NVC are this idea that everyone has sort of universal underlying needs. And that those needs are what bring up all of our different emotions, both good and bad, but the needs themselves are not in conflict with one another. And so when we're having a conflict about something, we can have different strategies for what we want to be doing, but at heart, we don't want different things. And so what's important is that when we're having a conflict, we first take the time to connect with one another, listen to what's actually going on, and then try to come up with a strategy together. So there's this sort of mantra of connection before solution that we try to use, because often we're finding that the real issue isn't like, I want to do this size of charred bunch. It's like the real issue is something a bit more fundamental. I don't feel like you're listening to me. And so getting to that, hearing one another, is what's actually going to allow a satisfying solution. And so trying to have those moments of connection. But the second part of that that's really important is choosing when to have those discussions, because it's not something that's so easy to do. So the kind of practical strategy there is choosing your moment to have that discussion. And often it means waiting a bit, because we were finding that in the middle of the field, in a busy harvest, is not a good time mostly to resolve issues, unless it's like a big safety concern. That's not really when you should try to resolve a conflict. So first, the strategy that we find is sort of reflect. If you're having this situation, you're noticing you're feeling very emotional, you're feeling upset or irritated with someone, first taking the step back to reflect on what's happening for you, think about what's really at the heart of that, and then try to think about what your request would be for the other person, and then going to them and trying to set up a time to talk and being open to listen to them in that moment. So that's a really sort of condensed idea. But those are sort of the general tools that we use to try to have conflict better and to hear each other. Because really the idea that I'm always repeating is like, we're not working against each other. We're trying to work together towards the same goal. And so even if someone has a different strategy on how to get there, we're on the same team. And so having those moments of connection that allow us to remember that is really important for us.
So that's pretty much the topics that we wanted to talk about today. I'll just sort of conclude a little to say, as we did at the beginning, that everything we're doing is a work in progress. We're only just starting to figure it out, and we plan to keep learning and keep evolving with as our farm grows and as we grow. We weren't born knowing how to do cooperation well. It's a skill and structure, and it's important to acknowledge that, and that everybody has to work on it. Even if you may think that you're really good at it, there's always things that you can develop. So as a farm, we've decided to make it a priority We think that a healthy work environment benefits everyone. It benefits the four of us. It benefits our employees, our families, and our clients, because we are in a better place to be better farmers. We think it's important to access resources, ask for help, and to invest in the structures and the learning. So we work with a coach, we've done holistic farm planning, we've taken courses on management and meetings, and we budget for that. So we recognize that this is something that's worth spending on and seeking out. So working cooperatively has its challenges, but for us, the benefits are enormous, and it's one of the only ways that we could see ourselves farming in a way that is healthy and sustainable. So going forward, we want to continue working on everything to do with communication, because that will never end. Management, how to be better managers, and cooperation. We also want to think about, in the future, if this comes up, how would we incorporate long-term employees into our cooperative structure? We want to improve our relationships and build stronger ties with our community and neighboring farms. And we just want to keep learning. So we'll go over to questions. And I also wanted to say that if anybody else has ideas or things that they're doing on their own farm that would be helpful to share, we would also love to hear that. And I think that Dee will take over for the questions here.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. That was really super interesting, and I've taken loads of notes, even though I know it's been recorded, and I'm sure, like lots of people, I feel like we could just speak for hours. And there is quite a lot of questions that have been asked, and we've got 20 minutes, so I will try and see if we can go through them all. Unfortunately, the way the webinar system works, I'm going to have to ask the questions on behalf of everyone who's asked them, because we can't pull your videos up. So I'm sorry you can't ask them yourself. It'd be much nicer to hear lots of people's voices and ideas and questions, rather than me asking for you, but I'm just going to have to do that. So the first question was from Liv James, which was, love the chart, which is reference to the roles and responsibilities chart, but the question is, does it ever contribute to unintentional power dynamics?
I think it does, yes. I think that it is it's a hard thing to allow, when somebody is in charge of an area, that it does create a dynamic in which they may not listen to your idea or want to hear your idea, depending on their own feelings around that. I wouldn't say that it's something that I wouldn't say that it's any more because we have roles and responsibilities. I think it's the same dynamics that would come up regardless. What do you think, Natalie?
Yeah, I think it's like, definitely we're within, white supremacist structures, we're within sexist structures, we're within colonial structures. So it's like all of those things are playing into what we do. And so I think the structures and the chart are sort of working to help us divide it and give us an opportunity to be really explicit about what's happening. But it doesn't mean that we're avoiding any of those things, I don't think.
Okay. Yeah, and I guess like what you were kind of ending it on around, like always just being conscious that we're like, all have to kind of, I guess, like always be practicing and being conscious that like we don't have like, well, a lot of people maybe don't have like histories or cultures of like communicating and all the different, I guess like the different dynamics that can come up through that. But yeah, it was really interesting hearing more about the practice you do around communication, which I imagine help at least, address that as it comes. So the next question, so we're just doing in order, because it felt the first way to do it. The next question, actually, a question that I asked. which is, in the presentation you said that your seasonal workers work from April to November, but as co-op members, well, so what I was wondering is, are you producing and distributing all year round, or do you actually have almost like a winter season off where you're kind of indoors doing a lot of co-op and farm business management, or do you always have to balance being in the field and everything else?
Yeah, no, this is one of the, I would say, advantages of Canada. It's like very cold. So we're really coming right now to the end of our growing season, and until December, we'll have a little bit of sales, but it's stuff that's already harvested. So we're doing still a bit of field work and cleanup, but we definitely have a pretty significant winter season where we get to, as full-time co-op members, we are doing more of the, computer work, all the administration stuff. We're doing the crop planning, all of that. But it's also a really nice time for us because it's also our sort of rest time in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because in the climate here, you can farm all year round. And even if, a lot of, I guess, members wouldn't necessarily be producing like on site all year round, but people buy in. So it's just curious thinking about like where you have how you'd have to structure the year if you were also farming the whole year in the season. So the next question is, there's more are coming. There's about 15. We'll give it a go. Is for Mary Lee's, which is, can you give some examples of the directed? Okay, so there's a whole bunch of questions around coaching and the interview process, but Lauren, who's behind the scenes, is just moving the questions around, so I realized I've jumped to the wrong bit, so I'm just going to hold that one for a sec. The next question in the list was from Dan, which was around finance. There's a couple of questions around finance. So the first one was, how did you raise money to buy the land? And is everyone in the co-op equal in terms of capital outlay? And how would it work if different people put different amounts of money in? And how did you make that fair when working cooperatively, and the whole kind of system that you've come up with? And then a following question from Springtail Farm was, if you can elaborate on how you split the ownership and purchase of the land. Is it the co-op that bought and owns the land, or is it you as 4 individuals? And did each member, again, contribute the same amount of costs to buy the land, and if not, how are you dealing with that?
So we bought the land as we have here called a limited liability corporation. So it's basically as 4 individuals. And we were able to do that with our own savings and with family assistance, as well as a governmental program that backed our purchase for us, so specific to agricultural farm purchases. And we, because of the family contribution, we did contribute different amounts. And so we made a contract. We used a notary, a professional, to help us write out that contract, which would account for what to do in the scenario of someone leaving. And structuring it that way, where it wasn't actually the cooperative that bought the farm, has worked well, because now my partner has since then bought into the ownership of the land. So we had a set minimum contribution, which he contributed, and now he is a co-owner of the farm, even though he is not working here himself. And we rent the land to our cooperative farm. So it's a little complicated. We worked with a cooperative developmental group that helped advise us on how to set that up, as well as a notary. So we had a lot of professional support during the initial purchasing. We made contracts and agreements, and I think that.
Yeah, and then just in terms of the co-op, how it's structured, because the land ownership and the co-op business are 2 slightly different things. So that one, we did, the 4 of us start each on sort of equal footing. We each put in the same amount of money. And if we had an employee or someone else joining the co-op, they would also sort of buy in with the same share. But I think there are really interesting examples we can't speak to as well. I saw someone in the chat was saying, if you're an existing farm looking to transition to a cooperative, where some people are coming in with a lot more assets that are just different from our model, but we do know lots of farms in this area who are sort of pursuing that kind of model that we could maybe reference people to, or I'm sure other people have advice or thoughts on that.
Yeah, I agree with Dan in the chat, which says the finances sound fascinating. I would love to hear a whole session on this. I agree. And as part of the webinar program, we also run focus groups. Starting in 2022, it's the second phase of the project, and I've made a note that it may be useful to run a whole focus group on finance and co-op structures, possibly with some people from Co-ops UK who do a bit of farm advice already. Yeah, I'll make a note of that for the webinar program. So the next set of questions were around working with staff and interviews. And again, I'm just going to read them out. So one of the questions from Mary was, can you give some examples of the directed questions in the interviewing process? And a question from Anna was, please, can you share the list of questions you choose, what to ask future possible employees? And then from Springtail Farm, it says, oh, again, sorry, I haven't read them. I'm reading them out loud. So would you be willing to share your directed questions for employee applicants? It sounds like this would be really helpful in the hiring process. And similarly, would you be willing to share your employee contract? Yeah, that I guess there's questions around that, and there might be questions around if you'd share your whole PowerPoint. And yeah, I get, you can also, if you don't know, yeah, maybe you need to speak to other co-op members if you can share all this information. So feel free to also hear these questions and go away and think about it. And if you are willing to share different things people are asking for, we can then share it with all the attendees afterwards.
Yeah, I mean, I think we'd be happy to share the documents, and also sort of with the caveat that, you know, they're useful for us, and then not, you know, it's good to adapt them to your situation. And I think that was, especially with the employee questions, it wasn't even that they were like such amazing questions, but what we were trying to identify, especially talking to a lot of people who didn't have farm experience, was we had worked with our coach to be sort of like, these are our 5 top characteristics that are important to us. So I remember one of them was really like adaptability. I don't remember what the other ones were. So, you know, something sort of like hard workingness. So what she encouraged us to do was kind of like make up certain scenarios, which just hearing someone respond to would help just give us an insight into their character and sort of like how they respond to different situations. So I remember one that was always interesting was just the question of like, tell us about a conflict that you had in a previous job. Hearing people answer that question, just not that there's one wrong or right answer, but gave us a sense of like how they approach conflict and how they approach working with other people. Yeah, we could share but yeah, we'd be happy to share the questions because we do have them here, and our contract as well.
Okay, great. The next question, which so quite a lot of people have asked it, is but yeah, this one's from Sammy, which is, have you discussed different paces that people work at? So, and like, how do you deal with that? In your presentation you shared a lot about I guess just making the farm a place where people, even that quote you read out, people feel they can bring their whole selves, but I guess being able to work quick and hard is always really important in a farm. So how do you deal with different paces that people are working at? Is this an issue for you? Does it bring tension, and how do you resolve it?
Yeah, I think it's kind of been, I think this is the year where it's maybe come up a lot because we're training so many people, and it's like, not to brag, but all of us have worked on farms for a long time. And so it's like, we're faster and more skilled at these repetitive tasks that we're doing than the people we're hiring. And so I think there is a certain amount of like, we are used to a certain pace, and as we're training, have to train that pace, but also have to train how to do it well. So I think there's been sort of the like learning curve of how to do that well. And I think we're trying to follow the model of first teach how to do something and then teach how to do it fast. But you might have
And I was going to say that we are in a maybe a unique position, but it seems like there's many other cooperatives here, but being for managers, there's often a couple of us or all of us in the field. And a lot of, I think, how you teach pace is through setting the example. So we wouldn't expect our employees to go out and, you know, on their first week, be able to harvest a bed of carrots alone without us there to show them, you know, the motions to move quickly, to, you know, the ways, you know, not to be sitting cross-legged. There's certain things that we're just leading by example. It definitely does happen, especially in the asparagus harvesters. We did have some very different paces. That was the one scenario where we did actually let an employee go, but it wasn't someone that we were really counting on. It wasn't a full season. It was just somebody who was meant to be there for the weekends. And so I do think it would be, it definitely is something that may come up. We may be just fortunate in the employees that we've had so far as well.
Thank you. So this next set of questions are around the coach that you spoke about, and a question from Tim, just wondering, how did you find the coach and how much did it cost? And then a question from Poppy, which is, again, can you talk more about the coach, the approach that they take and how you work with them? Do you pay for the coach or is it funded?
Yeah, so this is like pretty specific. We're very lucky where we are in Quebec in particular. It's a province that has a lot of support for farming, and part of that is basically grant funded, or like it's at a discount, our access to various professionals. So a lot of those are sort of farming professionals, but there's also, you know, financial professionals. And how we found our coach was through this. We were asking for someone who would help us with co-management and HR, and this person was recommended. So we do pay a small amount, but it's much less than her full fee is, because it is supported by the government. So we're super lucky in that, and really recognize that it's not something everyone could afford, but we really feel like it was a good investment. And, you know, the general principle, I think we would still at this point be willing to pay a good amount for this kind of service.
Okay, great. And yeah, I think we can share a bit about it at the end, but there's a few projects who do I guess kind of like coaching or mentoring or support for these kind of systems, which we'll just give a little bit of attention to at the end of the session as well. And if people know of any, please do share them in the chat. If there's like coaches or projects that offer this kind of work, please do feel free to share with everyone in the chat. The next question, again, in order, was actually from me again, which was in the presentation you said that you increased pay for returning employees. So I was then wondering, do you have different wages for staff depending on the amount of years that they've worked on the farm? And as co-op members, do you get paid more per hour, or do you have a different payment system again yourselves, which maybe isn't per hour, but it sounds like you said in your presentation it's enough to live on, and you're working on that. But I was just curious about the financial distinctions you make.
Yeah, so for us as co-op members, the way we did it last year, because it was, so we were sort of thinking, okay, what do we need to make ends meet? And this is how much we're going to pay ourselves over the year. And then we split that up into a monthly salary, because that was in 2020. We were in the second year of our business. We weren't really sure, you know, is this goal achievable? But then when we achieved that for 2021, we thought, okay, how much can the business increase our pay? So we pay ourselves, we don't pay ourselves hourly, we pay ourselves a set monthly amount, which is the same over the year. So in the summer, we're working much longer hours than we are in the winter, but we divide that pay up over the year. And for our employees, we're still sort of figuring that out. We did give this year we had one returning employee who we paid a higher amount than our 3 new employees. Next year, having a employee who's returning after 2 years and employees who are returning after 1 year, it's going to be an interesting conversation this winter to figure out. I think we'll have to actually develop a pay scale structure that we will follow, but we haven't yet outlined that.
Okay, great, thanks. That's interesting. So we've got a quick question, which is, from Rosie, could you clarify if you, when you talked about giving 3 days paid leave or like sick leave for staff, and then you said that everyone gets a week off vacation and no more than 2 people at a time, is that week paid?
So for labor laws where we are, we legally have to pay 4% vacation. And so that would mean that after 6 months of work, each employee would qualify for a week of paid vacation, and that we are legally obliged to pay them for. So what we decided to do was to offer them to take that paid week in the summer. So it would be something that if you weren't sure how long your employees were staying, that might not really work, that structure for you. But we felt very confident that these employees were staying the whole summer, and we could offer them that week in advance. And so rather than paying it out to them at the end of their season, which is what many people do, they just wouldn't offer them the vacation and then would give them a vacation payout when their contract is over. We offered them to take it paid ahead of time.
Great, thanks. Sorry, someone's actually just said in the chat that they just wanted to clarify, are you paying your summer employees salary by the hour? But my understanding is you pay by the hour.
They are paid by the hour, yes.
Great.
And we're on salary and they're paid by the hour. So even though we are making more than our employees are in a weekly setting, we're actually paying ourselves much less by the hour than we are paying them because we're working much longer hours.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So there's still quite a few questions, and I'm sorry, I don't think we can go through them all, or we can, but I have to go because I have a 1.5-year-old daughter who I can't stay away from too late in the evening. But we still have a few more minutes, so I'm just going to run through a few more questions, and we'll just, we're almost there with the questions, and they're all really great, and I kind of want to hear all the answers, I'm sure, like everyone else. One question, which you did actually mention earlier, is could you just say a little bit more about the producers co-op that you're part of?
Sure. So just really briefly, it's there's 7 farms in our sort of local region, and what we do is kind of a multi-farm box. So it's vegetables, but it's also meat, cheese, eggs, fruit, all sorts of stuff, and it's home delivered. So the farms work together in this producers co-op to set up the business model, and then the distribution and everything is happening by employees of the co-op. So for us, it's a really great chance to work with other farmers in our area, but it's also really nice because it's sort of a wholesale venue, but we have a lot more control over what the venue is buying, and we get slightly higher prices because it's a business we're paying into. So there's lots more to talk about, but that's sort of the brief thing, and it's called Farmhouse Food, if anyone was interested in hearing more about it.
Cool, I'm gonna look that up. Is if we like look online, you can look up farmhouse food.
Yeah.
Great. And then I'm just going to ask one last question, and apologies for the three that I'm leaving out. But maybe, yeah, people can always get in touch, or as I say, we can maybe look into having more focus groups around this next year. But the last question, which is from Javier, is just, are there any other co-op farm models that you'd recommend that are being useful in your journey? Or farms to look at, co-op farms.
Yeah, I mean, we're very lucky, especially in Quebec. There's a lot of co-op farms. One that we would definitely shout out was the farm where Heather worked for 2 years, Ferme Tournesol. And
I could write that.
Yeah, you can write it. And you may know them also because Dan and Fred wrote a crop planning guide book that's been super helpful as well. They've been existing for 15 years. So they're really great mentors for us, and they're really amazing. And then I would say we're also sort of part of a bigger cohort of, there's a lot of farms in Quebec sort of our generation that are in the cooperative or kind of collective model. So yeah, we could put a few other names in there, just of people who are more similar to us. And then I could also put in the name of the farm nearby here, who's a really big established farm, and they're kind of interesting because they're a really successful farm in our region. A couple owned it, they separated recently and are transitioning to a workers cooperative. So one of the members of that couple and the workers are making it a cooperative. So there's a lot of cool stuff happening around co-op farms in Quebec in particular, but I think across Canada, there's interesting stuff happening.
Yeah, great. If you're happy to share the name of that farm in the chat, and also the producers, Carl, we said you're part of, and any other names, and also like if we, and we'll send out like a follow-up to all attendees with like a link to the recording, and we can always send out if anyone wants to email me, attendees as well, with any links or anything that you think is interesting for everyone else to see, please do, and I'll share an email with everyone in probably a couple of weeks from now. But I think we are going to bring this to a close. I think, Amma, who is on the in the webinar, who's an LWA member but also works in facilitation and other projects, who I thought I was going to give a moment to speak here, but I didn't realize as an attendee you can't speak. But if Amma, if you want to just share in the chat also the work that you're doing around I guess like systems and structures, please just share it in the chat, and the link to the work that you're doing, because there is, I think increasingly there are projects and people doing more work and support for farms who want to kind of cultivate healthy work cultures, including some of our members. So it'd be great to see what you're doing. So we'll bring it to a close. Just want to say a really huge thank you to Natalie and Heather for all the time that you've put into preparing and teaching and sharing on this webinar. It's been really fantastic and lively and dynamic and engaging, and I think probably for lots of people here tonight, a lot of food for thought. So it has been recorded, and we will send a link to everyone who's booked a ticket, and we will put it on the Landworkers Alliance website. We also want to say a thanks to our partner organizations in this webinar series who work behind the scenes. So Sinead from the Gaia Foundation, Phil from the OGA, and Susie from the CSA Network. And importantly, as I mentioned already, we'll be running another monthly webinar series in 2022, and if you'd like to be involved in running a webinar or have a theme that you'd like to suggest that we do run something on, please do let us know, because it's always really useful to hear what the membership would like webinars on, and this one, for example, like many thanks to LWA members Springtail Farm and Trofle Market Garden, Pitney Farm Market Garden, who suggested this topic and our speakers today. I'm just going to share in the chat the webinar for next month, which is on Wednesday, the 24th of November. And it's been organized by the CSA network, and it's a masterclass composting workshop for small-scale farmers, which I will share here. Ooh, yeah. And then also it would be really useful as attendees to please give us any feedback you'd like to about this webinar. And I've just put a link in the chat as well, with a link to the feedback form, which feedback is always really welcome, really useful, because it does help us make sure we're running a webinar series in a way that works for everyone listening and joining and participating. So yeah, I'll leave it at that. Again, massive thanks, well, to Lauren doing tech behind the scenes, and to Natalie and Heather. That was it was a really, really great webinar, and thanks again for all the lively discussion and questions. And we'll all be in touch soon, I'm sure.
Thanks so much for having us, and thanks to everyone for coming. And do feel free to get in touch with us, and we'll try and share some of those documents on the follow-up as well.
Right.